Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the opening remarks, the first part of the Oxford English World Symposium today. We should get the show going, so let's hand over to the people doing the opening remarks. Danica, over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sean. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Danica Salazar, and I am Executive Editor for World Englishes for Oxford Languages. Welcome to the second day of the Oxford World English Symposium. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's parallel sessions, which took us from Oxford to Nigeria, Uganda, and South Africa, to India, China, South Korea, and Southeast Asia, to Australia, and then all the way back to London. We heard about interesting lexicographical projects such as the documentation of World English vocabulary and pronunciation in the OED, the creation of localized English dictionaries in South Africa, and the collection of new words in the Greater China region. We learned about concepts such as language prejudice, context-based English language teaching, and translingual words. We were fascinated by descriptions of varieties of English such as multicultural London English, Southeast Asian English, Ugandan English, and Australian Aboriginal English. We thank all of our parallel session speakers for so generously sharing their expertise with us. Today promises to be just as rewarding and thought-provoking as yesterday, as we all come together live to discuss four very important topics relating to dictionaries and world Englishes. Now, I would like to start today's program by introducing one of the symposium's co-chairs, a historical lexicographer who has had a long and distinguished career in the Oxford English Dictionary, the person who is capably leading us during a time of great change and innovation for the OED, as we approach the milestone of its 100th anniversary and look forward to the future of the dictionary. Everyone, it is my honor to present to you the Chief Editor of the OED, Michael Prophet.
Thank you, Danica, and hello, everyone. On behalf of the OED staff, the Oxford Languages team, and our colleagues from across OUP, I'd like to welcome you all to the Oxford World English Symposium. Today is about bringing together all kinds of linguists, researchers, teachers, writers, lexicographers from all over the world to share insights and experiences about the diversification and decentralization of English as a global language. For those of us who work on dictionaries, there are both opportunities and challenges in how we meet our obligation to recognize and document language in ways that accurately represent the multicultural Anglophone population. Our aim is to record all varieties of English accurately and respectfully in ways that are culturally appropriate and beneficial. And our first panel today will discuss how dictionaries can fulfill that aim to best effect. The dictionary that I work on, the OED, has always documented English internationally, but as the spread and number of English speakers has accelerated, and the highest estimates suggest that as many as 2 billion people speak English to some degree today, we have greatly expanded our program to research and report on English worldwide. But to provide an accurate and representative picture takes more than lexicographical expertise. We can only do it with the help of people with experience and knowledge of each variety of English. So in recent years, the OED team has formed many much valued collaborations with researchers across the globe. The OED's primary role in those projects is the same as my role here today, to listen and to learn. It's both a pleasure and a purpose of lexicography to learn new things every day and to share those discoveries. If education is about transforming information into knowledge and communicating that knowledge across groups and generations, then lexicography is fundamentally a process of continuous learning. The independent status of English varieties is increasingly marked by lexical innovation beyond the historical core of British and American English, and also by orthographic and syntactic innovation. A recent and fairly vivid example of this is the West African hybrid language known as Sheng. Sheng originated as a street language among the urban youth of Nairobi, but it's now used by people in various age groups and social classes in communities across Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Linguistically, it's rather complex, drawing freely on lexical and grammatical elements of English, Swahili, and other local languages. But its spontaneous creativity feels like an equal and opposite reaction to code switching in many ways. The fourth of our panels today will talk about the various manifestations of variation and change in English, regional and social dialects and hybrids like that, and also the theoretical frameworks and terminology surrounding them. But theory aside, for most speakers of English, there is no such thing as World English. There is just the lived experience of language where they are. And for lexicographers intent on describing English as it's genuinely used, accessing authentic experience and evidence is absolutely vital. And as our second panel will discuss, dictionaries are only as good as the evidence they depend on. That evidence can range from vast aggregated text corpora to individual testimonies. From the very start of its history, the OED has made public appeals for information and evidence. By far the most popular of the recent ones we've done was called Words Where You Are. We asked people to remember a time in their life when they'd used a word familiar to them, but which in a new context was met with incomprehension or ridicule. Those moments can linger in the memory, and I'll tell you in a minute about mine. And so from across the world, from Manchester to Manila to Massachusetts, people sent us their own stories of words and phrases which had unexpectedly become tokens of linguistic difference or cultural dissonance. A few months ago, we held an Oxford Languages webinar on the topic of language prejudice. Among the many powerful and compelling narratives, one resonated with me particularly strongly. Jeanette Alsop, who I'm happy to say joins us today, told us about the experience of her late husband, Richard, known to many of us as the esteemed editor of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage. Jeanette described how, as a student new to the UK, Richard had had his English criticised and corrected by his tutor. What she described took me right back to my own first experiences of Oxford and of the Oxford English Dictionary and of the difference between the two. I came to Oxford from Scotland as an undergraduate studying English language and literature. It was my first time living away from home, and Oxford seemed full of very confident people. I didn't feel that way. I felt pretty unsure of myself and quite vulnerable. My first student essay was on the subject of Tennyson's In Memoriam. My tutor seemed to quite like what I had to say, but he criticised and corrected my language, one word in particular. I'd used the word outwith, meaning beyond or outside. He'd circled the word and written archaism in red pen. I felt slightly ashamed, but also slightly affronted. So at the end of the tutorial, I approached him and I told him that this word was used all the time in Scotland. He took the essay back, he crossed out archaism, and he wrote regionalism. In a small way, I had been othered. However good his intentions, he'd asserted the authority not just of a teacher over a student, but of standard British English over other varieties. In language, as in other areas of life, there is an undefined border between agreed standards and imposed rules, between authority and authoritarianism. So what did I do? Well, like anyone who needs to settle a language argument, I consulted a dictionary, in fact, the OED. And the OED entry for outwith confirmed that it was a word mainly used in Scotland. So factually, it conveyed the same useful point that my tutor had put across to me. But tonally, the two were very different. The OED didn't say it was wrong or non-standard to use the word. It was descriptive where my tutor had been prescriptive. Also, my tutor's fairly curt dismissal contrasted with the expansive coverage in the OED. There was a long list of spelling variants, and there were quotations extracted from real books and periodicals over several centuries. Overall, the entry offered a dispassionate description of the word's meaning usage over time based on analysis of the available evidence. By showing the historical and human context, the OED allowed me to recognize my own use of the word as part of a linguistic tradition and to identify myself as part of a community of speakers. So I felt represented, not repudiated, and that is what the OED should do for all English speakers. These problems aren't unique to English, of course. One of the first thinkers to write about decolonization, Frantz Fanon, described how growing up in Martinique, he was constantly criticized for using Creole French rather than French French, in other words, white French. That formative experience led to his advocacy strongly resistant to colonists' narratives about universal standards, implicitly European standards. But in a language teaching context, norms and standards are needed. So our third panel will discuss some of the complexities and contradictions around these issues. Language change is a collaborative enterprise, but it doesn't always look like one because the process of influence between speakers and writers is usually indirect or imperceptible. Lexicography can be seen in a similar way, and each OED entry is the product of a kind of phased collaboration between its numerous contributors. The range of voices and perspectives contained within a single OED entry goes far beyond the editorial team of researchers, editors, etymologists, and bibliographers. The sphere of reference extends backwards through time in the evidence analysed and the quotations selected to encompass writers and speakers that participated in each word's evolution. And we refer outwards, seeking advice from specialist consultants expert in their field, as well as to the kind of shared research projects that I mentioned earlier. The OED depends and thrives on this kind of collaboration, and today is an opportunity to mark that and to celebrate it. I know that our panelists will have many views about the present state and future directions of English, and about what linguists and lexicographers should be doing in response. One enduring strength of English is its susceptibility to influence, and the same, I think, is true of lexicographers and linguists. We have to remain attentive, unassuming, and curious, continuously open to new information and evidence, and that's really what today is about. So I'd like to thank all of you attending. I want to thank Simone and Joe and Sean, who have worked so hard behind the scenes to prepare the symposium today. I'm really grateful to all our panel members for their time, their ideas, and their energy. And I want to thank our committee for putting together such a thoughtful program, Philip and Lisa, who you'll hear from later, and of course, Danica, whose energy and inspiration have guided not only today's event, but also the OED's World English Project over the last few years. And with that, I'll say enjoy the day, and I'll hand back to Danica. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Michael. I think we can all relate to your story about outfit. I will never forget the moment I was first told that thrice was not a thing and that the adjective of comfort is pronounced comfortable and not comfortable. Now, most of us speaking today are lexicographers or linguists or language teachers or language researchers. In other words, people who spend our days examining language. But when we were searching for someone to give the keynote address for the symposium, we knew we wanted someone who could give us a different perspective. We wanted someone who would speak from the point of view of a person who does not study or investigate a variety of English, but rather uses it to create, to make art. And I think we have found just the right person. She describes herself as being from a rock in the middle of the sea. This rock, the island of Bermuda, plays an important role in the history of English. Bermudan English has an estimated 65,000 speakers and is the smallest national variety represented in the OED. But it's also one of the oldest. Settled in 1612, Bermuda was one of the very first places, second only to Jamestown, Virginia, where English was spoken outside the British Isles. Indeed, until now, vestiges of Elizabethan English still remain in modern Bermudan English. Our keynote speaker uses the English of Bermuda in her poetry to explore queerness through the lens of the Black Caribbean experience. She uses it as a medium to, in her words, write of home, of hurricanes, of Bermudan history, mythology, and folklore. Everyone, please do join me in giving a warm welcome to Aisha Townsend.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Danica, and everyone who I can't see but exists in all of the technology. It is very early over here at 32 degrees north and 64, I believe, west in St. George's, Bermuda. But I am honored to be here. And thank you for letting me wax poetic on the absolute love of my life. So it was the Honorable Bajan poet E. Kamal Brathwaite who said that the hurricane does not roar in pentameter. This is fitting, considering Bermuda's history with that of tempest. It was a hurricane that first brought English man and language to our shores, knocked off course from Virginia. It was a hurricane of literary merit long after those English put roots in the soil that found us mentioned on stage. Our still vexed Bermuds, inspiring Shakespeare's mammoth own tempest. It was hurricanes that coined the phrase in the first place. Vexed, de manorum insulum, Isle of Devils, seas too churned for vessels or hope. It's hurricanes who are the original Bermudians and the composer of our experience. When Kamal Brathwaite spoke of hurricanes and pentameters, he did so to highlight the environmental experience of the Caribbean voice, that which is shaped by the elements. Here it would be the August sun, or the piercing damp cold in winter, and that of the unyielding wind. When Bermudians speak, it's not within the structures that sovereign English would impose. We speak in a dialect of tide, of early morning kiskidees and boiler reefs that round the island like a backbone. I once wrote that my mouth is a brackish pond, a stew of salt. There's a liturgy thumping in my chest to pelt my praises in sargassum. So I sound of cedar, of loquats in spring, and Suriname cherry jelly on fingers. That poem, a praise in the nature of my endemic tongue. I was trying, in effort, to capture the ineffability of the Bermudian voice. And inevitably, as it happens when one begins to write about Bermuda, we kind of lean into the expected themes, all the everything that surrounds us. And across our small but definitive literary tradition, our writers meditate on some same or other. You'll find the oleander in Paul Madden's poem, The Bloated Road Toad in Kim Dismont Robinson, Andre Simon's 7 Atlantic Hurricanes, Kristen White Always Has a Bermudiana, and Chris Astwood, Reddish Brown, Twisted Stalks and Fronds of Sargassum. A chorus of many, somehow one voice. To write a Bermuda is to do so with the tide of everyday ephemera. As most things, though, in the wrong hands, this can become quickly hackneyed. I had students once who lamented at the reflex to herald the island's flora and fauna. Tired of hearing about the shorts and the pink sand whenever someone talks about Bermuda. And I get it. It can become frustrating whenever the island is mentioned and these fragments of identity serve as the colorants of descriptors. And usually this is found in swift forms of journalism, advertising, marketing, a ready neck catchphrase to catch the eye, a blatant finger to point to mascot that this right here is Bermudian. It can be reductive. Just shorts, just sand, just stepped roofs. Words without heft or history. Meaning ascribed to experience alters this. Memory usually serving as the conduit, because let's be honest, we are the shorts. We all had to wear them when we switched into our summer uniform with knee-high socks and a blazer, and we definitely are the sand, and being admonished for tracking it from the beach to the car, even when your mama told you to make sure to use a towel to shake loose any sticking pink to your feet. Being Bermudian means not necessarily having to exemplify these things because they exist in the tendons of experience, the home growing through us as us. It's why when one tries to pin down a Bermudian accent, it always falls short. We're coined in a superfluous-ish, which itself holds identifying principles within the context of our culture. Bermuda and Bermudians are always subtly suffixed, where Caribbean-ish, mixed-ish, Brit-ish. Our amalgamated origin spills out of food, off of our tongues. Our accent is always reported on for its intriguing qualities, and can't quite put my finger on it nature. We're the sum of somewhat, and our ish stands on its own as an exemplar of vague. My friend Dejan painted a mural on Reed Street once, an entire celebration of our language. On every inch, a word, catchphrase, some colloquialism common to this Bermudian experience. He said, "We can't extort national pride outward if we ourselves are not proud of who we are at home." Who we are at home. Every time I passed the mural, I found a word I had forgotten about, because time will do that. The amount of interviews for jobs, flights overseas, years in a college in a city where you're the only one of you and having to repeat, or, oh, so you're British, right? If you're stateside, and right, so you're American if you're across the pond. Never quite, always something else. And that familiar constant of trading words back and forth like a shared bottle of water on the hottest day at the beach is lost. You assimilate. I borrowed for sure from 7 years in Minnesota, though in a mouth made for storms, it ended up sounding like for sure. Proof that tide always comes back. Now, it wasn't long after that mural was completed that a belt bearing its likeness was thrown into production and into shops. All of a sudden, Chopson in full view of an audience not privy to WAP and mug. It be like that sometimes. Commodification as guise for value. And other times, In almost every turn of industry, the Bermudian of Bermudians is diametrically opposed, like it's the offense of opening an umbrella indoors. There's no need for weather in a boardroom. A tradition held, almost 200 years ago, Suzette Lloyd, British socialite, visiting the island in the early 19th century, remarks in a Sketches of Bermuda, her published letters of the confluence of white children with black nurses. And from this constant intercourse with the Negroes, the children contract that disagreeable Creole drawl, which few ever entirely lose. Disagreeable, untidy, unwieldy, vexed. It's cool on a belt or a hat, but don't put it in every mouth. This, the evidence of language being people, and people meeting a barrier. When you can't command a storm, you put it in a teacup and rebrand it to an off label. The witting nerve of colonization to oblige speech and then admonish it when it takes up its own devices. And I'll be honest in my admission that I'm not acquainted with the intricate experience which would permit the demonization of this mother tongue to wash it clean. But we all have the remnant of some microaggression or other. It's a primary school teacher telling you not to say heel, but hill. It's your mother correcting you in a department store for carrying the extra syllable in your refusal. No, because there is no Bermudian child under the age of 5 who has uttered no monosyllabically. It's a celebrated local reggae artist who sings in a Jamaican accent, responding to criticism of this with vigor. Open air concert. Yo, you want to know why I don't sing in a Bermudian accent? Because this is what it will sound like. It's having to hear yourself pantomimed through the most expensive speakers, cardioid microphone, well-balanced levels on a soundboard as something akin to broken chords, haphazardly smashed out of a child's toy piano. Anything will sound out of tune if it's played with the wrong instrument. In those times, the tongue is never a hurricane. It's the noise that mimics rain. Static waves on the radio, your white noise sleep machine, your old 3000 BTU air condition. Noise without character and nowhere near precipitous. This is the tango we play with having pride and having it in certain places. Because of course, dialect, being politically and economically rendered, is expected in some places and demonized in others. This English of ours is no different. The first time I submitted a serious piece of writing to my professor in uni, he handed it right back to me without any markings. Try again, he said. It was like 10 to 20 pages of a writing sample I was planning on using for my MFA application. Dumbstruck. I couldn't understand what was wrong with it. What was wrong with it? I asked him. Nothing, he says. It's an all right story, but it's not yours. The protagonist for that story was a teenage boy from Brooklyn who perpetually daydreams. He comes home one evening, finds that his electricity is cut off in his house and his mother's not home from work, so he fumbles around in the dark for matches and eventually takes a candle to the lot behind his house. I was trying to write the great American novel. It baffles me now to even imagine how someone else had to awaken me to this discord. But when you don't see yourself represented, it's hard to know who you are. Hence the importance of the mural of Bermudian words and the words of Bermudian writers and reminder of Bermudian English. I started watching Kim's Convenience because of Kwame, or rather Darren. And the first time he walks on screen and speaks, the entire island happens at once. Tree frogs, V-50s slicing through the air without warning, South Shores waves, the wind. How warming to hear yourself bounce back in timbre and time and not through a funhouse mirror, distorted to a caricature that someone tells you is you, but you don't recognize. In that first moment, Darren on screen became a student of mine, reclining impossibly on the seat of his moped, relaying an affirmative yes I into his cell phone. And my friend Stefan, who exclaims like no one else I've ever heard, shut on, a quick succession cadence of surprise, or can't believe it, sheeshums. All the sinuous that makes a people, what Kamal Brathwaite called nation language or a kind of English. And I'm not one for a translation, and this isn't a lexicon, but rather you having a seat at the crown and anchor table. So hold fast to your queen. This is hundreds of years of tuning a storm into speech. English isn't a rite of passage, it's a middle passage detour. This is not the product of what English has done to us, but rather what hundreds of years of what we have been able to do with English. Language as a soldering iron. It isn't slang, it's talking inside of a single home. This is how the family speaks in this house. After that initial draft, you couldn't stop me from writing about this place. I once heard that you write the same poem over and over and over in your lifetime. And in some ways, I feel that every poem, essay, and piece of fiction I've written are just iterations of the same verse. A theme and variations, if you will, on the musing of this home of mine. In more recent years, I've realized I don't write home, I am the home. The entire embodying representation of it. And in that idea of being, exude all the comforts of it. Home just shows up, envisaged, like those words of Paul and Kim, Andre, and Chris, Sabria Harvey's all damn lot, Jade Hassel's I Am Because You Are, and the list and list of other Bermudian writers, artists, luminaries, variations on a theme. Some of us sounding like a passing sun shower, some of us like a full-on gale, some of us like that damp February breeze I was telling you about, penetrating till the burn. Bermudians become different types of a storm based on when and where our storm was born. So, for instance, like my granny says afternoon, like she's holding her first syllable in choir practice. My older brother's accent travels straight from his throat. He'll say an entire sentence in 2 seconds with sucked teeth. Hey, you heard what happened to him from up the road, right? Mine comes right down the passage of a sinus, is nasally. And I was born in the generation of rap. The first love song I remember was Mary J. Blige and Method Man. Shorty, I'm there for you anytime you need me. For real, girl, it's me in your world. Believe me. Romance. And also New York. It's why I say coffee the way I do. This indicative of a shifting wind. Bermudians can mimic, can reroute our mouths, can sound like any and everything, because we are everything. We are everything. We're the Empire of England, taking up human arms to spread the gospel of itself, an unreckonable gain. And we're the prophet of it, Caliban cursing so we could pray, with a drunken tongue, half split across an ocean, mass ancestral grave, and the bellicose pallbearers who made it so, in the name of the monarch, our Father, in heaven he art. Don't sound like that in the House of Parliament, and definitely sound like that in the House of Parliament. Well, button up your tie, keep your hair down, and we're burning the Union Jack. We're the King's English and Black Berets. We're roots rock and reggae. We're confusing, contradicting. We're God Save the Queen and Hail to our island in the sea. We're every word you don't quite get and don't have to. Big up our faulty memories, our foot of the lane burnings, our gibbeting. We're those too. Because if the shark oil fits, then every tenement of this island is the only thing that language can claim and make use of. In William Strachey's 1610 True Repertory of the Wreck of the Sea Venture, he states, the curdling fear that everyone felt when they realized that Bermuda was the only source of land in the midst of their massive storm. We found it to be the dangerous and dreaded island, or rather islands of the Bermuda. They be so terrible to all that ever touched them, such tempests, thunders, and other fearful objects, feared above any other place in the world. My home, with such a damning inaugural mention to the world. He concludes, however, Yet it pleased our merciful God to make even this hideous and hated place both the place of our safety and means of our deliverance. If that isn't a thesis for our shared Englishes, world Englishes, making even this hideous thing anew, safe, delivered. When the people on the Sea Venture survived that unnamed hurricane and washed on our shores, they came into contact with the only other endemic Bermudian to raise such a clamor. Our national bird, the cahal. It's what time and tale thought was bewitching spirits. The bird that pierced the ear and screeched. No coincidence here. A storm petrel. One used to flying through high winds, a sibling to the hurricane. Both original indigenous Bermudians, loud and unable to pin down. The sound that this place must have been for us to inherit such a raucous, tempestuous tongue of weathered people, weather-prone, and natural forecasters. If this is any indication of our natural ancestry, then a hurricane is akin to a returning family member, a dysfunctional aunt or uncle drunkenly knocking over everything in the house but still welcomed. And so here we welcome in us something like them. Red dawn, closest point of approach, eye and aftermath. At once everything, dark and stormy, storm chaser. Thank you everyone for having me. I appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Aisha. There's nothing that I find more moving than hearing world Englishes being used to create something so beautiful. Well, so now we have come to the end of the closing program of today's second day of the Oxford World English Symposium. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Sean and Michael and Aisha for opening our program so beautifully. We will now take a short break and then we'll move on to today's first panel discussion in dictionaries and the decolonization of English, which will begin at 10 a.m. British time.